big chunk of money meant to help catch whoever shot these 3 kids put in someone's pocket instead.
America, we need to talk about what's happening in Minnesota because this is absolutely insane. We've got a former Minnesota Chamber of Commerce CEO who just got indicted for embezzling over $200,000, including stealing $30,000 from Crime Stopper rewards money meant to help solve cases involving murdered children. But here's the kicker. This is just the tip of the iceberg in what appears to be the most systematic fraud operation that I've ever seen on any state level.
Jonathan Weinhagen is accused of using some of that money on first-class plane tickets and oceanfront hotel rooms for him and his family. The chamber tells me Weinhagen resigned last year after an internal investigation into the organization's finances.
What is up, guys? Tyson De La Cruz here. Thank you so much for rocking with me. I'm telling you right now, what we're seeing in Minnesota isn't just isolated incidents of corruption. This is a systematic breakdown of oversight and accountability that's allowing fraudsters to steal millions and millions of taxpayer money while the most vulnerable people suffer. Let's break down how brazen this Minneapolis Chamber CEO fraud really was. Jonathan Weinhagen didn't just steal money. He created an entire fictional universe to cover his tracks.
Indictment accuses Weinhagen of creating a fake consulting company called Synergy Partners and an alias by the name of James Sullivan. Between 2019 and 2024, he's accused of funneling $100,000 from the chamber to his fake company and using that money for personal expenses.
Think about the level of premeditation here. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. Weinhagen created a fake consulting company, gave himself a fake identity as James Sullivan, and then systematically funneled over $100,000 to himself over 5 years. But when the chamber started asking questions about payments to his mysterious company, he didn't just come clean.
Court documents say Weinhagen covered his tracks by sending fake emails saying the company no longer existed and the owner died. The documents say Weinhagen created a fake obituary for the company owner saying James Sullivan died of pancreatic cancer.
He literally killed off his fake identity. This guy wrote an obituary for his imaginary business partner. The audacity here, guys, is absolutely staggering. But what really gets me fired up is what he did with the Crime Stopper money.
Federal prosecutors say Weinhagen, who you see there, abused his position as Minneapolis Chamber of Commerce CEO for nearly 6 years. And during that time, they say he stole more than $200,000 from the chamber. Investigators say Weinhagen stole $30,000 of that reward money from Crime Stoppers and then spent it on himself.
This man stole $30,000 in reward money that was specifically set aside to help solve crimes involving children. We're talking about money that could have helped catch the killer of a 6-year-old who was shot and killed in 2021. Her grandfather's reaction says it all.
It's just unbelievable that we live in a state where somebody could actually be that heartless and that greedy. And so there's parts of me that broke my heart to know that somebody's like that and can do that. And then there's parts of me that is really angry.
Now, this isn't just one isolated incident case. We could chalk it up to one bad actor, but what we're seeing in Minnesota is a pattern, an absolute pattern of systematic fraud that suggests something much deeper is wrong in how this state operates. While Weinhagen was living it up in first-class flights and oceanfront hotel rooms in Hawaii with stolen money, Minnesota was simultaneously dealing with what federal prosecutors call a systematic and wholesome attack on Minnesota's Medicaid system.
Breaking developments in Carol Evans' ongoing housing hustle investigation and the first guilty plea in a sweeping federal fraud case tied to Minnesota's Housing Stabilization Services Program. The charges were brought in the wake of reporting by A.J. Legault and our investigative team as they exposed fake meetings, forged signatures, and taxpayer money stolen.
We've talked about this a few times. The Housing Stabilization Services fraud is even more disgusting because it targets the most vulnerable people in the society, the homeless and desperate. These fraudsters were literally preying on people who had nothing, promising them housing help while billing Medicaid for services that they never even provided.
And to wake up freezing ice cold and having to go outside and pee, and you can't move because you're so damn cold, it sucks. It really, really sucks.
Last fall, Julie Kiros responded to this ad in a gas station bathroom, promising help.
Listen to this woman's story. She was freezing in a Minnesota winter, desperate for help, and she finds a flyer at a gas station bathroom promising housing assistance. She calls, gives them her Medicaid information, and then waits through the entire freezing winter for help that never comes, while these criminals are billing Medicaid in her name. Here's what really blows my mind about the scope of this fraud. We're not talking about a few bad actors. We're talking about an entire industry of fraud that was operating with impunity.
Jen, a systematic and wholesale attack on Minnesota's Medicaid system. That's how federal prosecutors described what happened inside the state's Housing Stabilization Services Program, or HSS. And now, one of the business owners at the center of our investigation is admitting guilt.
Anwar Dowd just pled guilty to wire fraud, admitting he received $1.2 million in fraudulent Medicaid billing. Get this, court documents show he was telling his employees to bill as much as they could and that he wouldn't scrutinize billable hours. This wasn't accidental overbilling. This was systematic theft.
Anwar pled guilty Thursday morning to wire fraud, receiving $1.2 million in Medicaid billing as part of the conspiracy, telling his employees to bill as much as they could, and he wouldn't scrutinize the purported billable hours.
And here's the kicker. Sources tell investigators that Anwar weaponized incompetence to target state's HHS program. Think about that phrase, weaponize incompetence. They deliberately created chaos and confusion to hide their theft. But the scale gets even worse. According to the report, 115 individual businesses have been stopped from billing Medicaid due to what the state calls credible allegations of fraud. 115 businesses. This isn't a few bad apples. This is an entire orchard that's rotten.
It's really hard to tell just how far they plan to push this federal investigation. We know 115 individual businesses have been stopped from billing Medicaid due to what the state labels credible allegations of fraud. Will there be charges in each and every one of those cases? We don't know.
Yeah.
Now, let me tell you what really gets me fired up about this whole situation. The level of systematic fraud doesn't just happen in a vacuum. This happens when you have weak leadership, poor oversight, and a culture that prioritizes political correctness over accountability. Think about the timeline here. Weinhanger was stealing money for 5 years from 2019 to 2024. The housing services fraud was going on for years. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in fraudulent billing, and it took investigative journalists to expose it, not state oversight.
He once was the face of business and progress. Now, the former head of the Minneapolis Chamber of Commerce is facing felonies, accused of stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars meant for the community.
Where was Minnesota's Department of Human Services during all this Medicaid fraud? Where were the auditors? Where was the basic oversight that should have caught fake companies billing for services that they never provided? Let's talk about the human cost here. While these fraudsters were living their best lives, first-class flights, oceanfront hotels, luxury lifestyles, real people were suffering. Families were waiting for justice for murdered children. Homeless people were freezing in Minnesota winters, waiting for help that never came. It's sick.
We trusted you.
I had trust that nobody would do anything like this.
Money raised to get justice
5 years, I haven't heard his voice.
for these children and their families.
And you lived your best life. You went to Hawaii, you took trips, you did everything for you and your family to be okay. What about our family?
This Minnesota fraud epidemic should be a wake-up call for every American about what happens when government grows too big and oversight becomes too weak. When you create massive bureaucratic programs with billions of dollars flowing through them and you don't have proper accountability measures, you're basically creating a feeding trough for criminals. The Housing Stabilization Services Program was supposed to help the most vulnerable people in society. Instead, it became a cash cow for fraudsters who saw an opportunity to exploit both the system and the people that they were meant to serve. And here's what really concerns me. If this is what we're seeing in Minnesota, what's happening in other states with similar programs? How many other systematic fraud operations are running right now, stealing taxpayer money while vulnerable people suffer? The fact that it took investigative journalists to expose this fraud tells you everything you need to know about the state of government oversight in Minnesota. The systems that were supposed to catch these frauds failed completely.
The crackdown on fraud is far from over, with further arrests and charges expected in the coming months.
Now, I'm glad to see federal prosecutors finally taking action. Weinhanger is facing up to 20 years in prison, and Anawa is looking at 41 to 51 months, which in my opinion is definitely not enough. But the damage is already done. Millions of tax dollars have been stolen, vulnerable people have been exploited, and families seeking justice for murdered children have been betrayed. America, what we're seeing in Minnesota is what happens when government accountability breaks down completely. You get systematic fraud operations that steal hundreds of millions of dollars while people who need the most get nothing. This isn't just about Minnesota. This is about a fundamental question of whether our government systems can be trusted to actually serve the people that they're supposed to help, or whether they're just going to become a feeding trough for criminals and fraudsters. The families of murdered children deserve better. The homeless people freezing in Minnesota winters deserve better. And the taxpayers who funded these programs deserve leaders who actually protect their money instead of creating systems that are so poorly managed they become criminal enterprises. We need real accountability, real oversight, and real consequences for people who enable this kind of systematic fraud. Because if we don't fix the problem, Minnesota won't be the last state we see with this level of corruption. Let me know what you think about this. Drop it down in the comment section down below. Smash the like button if you kindly would. Share, subscribe, and as always, guys, I'll catch you on the next one.